June 17, 1982. 5 hikers set out at dawn from the small mountain town of Pine Ridge, Colorado. Their destination was Eagle Peak, a challenging 3-day trek through the rugged wilderness of the Rocky Mountains. The group had planned the expedition for months, marking trails on topographical maps and assembling the best equipment they could afford. James Harrison, 28, led the group. A geology professor at Colorado State University, he had hiked the Rockies since childhood and knew the region better than most locals. His girlfriend Melissa Chen, 26, was a botanical researcher documenting alpine plant species for her doctoral dissertation. Their friends brothers Tom and Rick Lawson, 25 and 23, and photographer Sarah Mitchell, 24, completed the party. The 5 signed the trail register at the Pinewood Ranger Station at 6:42 a.m. Ranger Paul Decker remembered them as well prepared and experienced with appropriate gear for the unpredictable mountain weather. "Now, be careful up near Eagle Peak," he warned them. "We've had unusual weather patterns this season. Storm fronts moving in without much warning." James assured the ranger they would monitor conditions carefully. Their itinerary was precise. Reach Aspen Meadow by nightfall. Camp at Timber Lake. The following evening, summit Eagle Peak on the 3rd day, then return via the Western Trail. They were due back on June 21st. Sarah Mitchell, freelance photographer whose work occasionally appeared in outdoor magazines, documented their departure with her Nikon camera. What that photo album revealed about the missing hikers will shock you. Before we continue, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. At Gone Cold, we uncover America's most baffling disappearances every Thursday. Now, let's find out what really happened to those 5 friends in the mountains. She took a group photo outside the ranger station, setting the timer. And rushing to join her friends, they stood arm in arm, smiling with the excitement of adventure ahead. It was the last confirmed sighting of any of them. Asterisk. By the evening of June 21st, when the hikers failed to return, Ranger Decker notified search and rescue. The initial response was measured experienced. Hikers often stayed an extra day in the wilderness, especially if the weather or trail conditions warranted caution. But by the following morning, with no sign of the group at any of the trail checkpoints, a full search operation launched. Teams with dogs covered the main trail and likely alternate routes. Helicopters scanned the rugged terrain from above. 3 days into the search, rescuers found the group's first campsite at Aspen Meadow. The tent positions and fire pit indicated a normal, uneventful stay. The team had continued their journey as planned. A week passed with no further signs. The search expanded to cover increasingly unlikely scenarios. Had they wandered far off trail? Fallen into a ravine? Been caught in one of the season's sudden storms? 2 weeks after the disappearance, searchers discovered items from the group scattered near a steep ridge about a mile east of Timber Lake. A backpack identified as belonging to Tom Lawson contained a water bottle, energy bars, and a small first aid kit. 50 yards away, they found a hiking boot matching Sarah's size. Owsie's compass lay nearby, its glass cracked. The location made no sense. It was well off their planned route, in terrain so difficult that even the search team struggled to navigate it. Why would 5 experienced hikers abandon their carefully plotted course for this treacherous area? The scattered personal items suggested a catastrophic event, perhaps a sudden storm, rock slide, or a group of separate falls. Yet despite expanded searching in the area, no bodies were found. No clothing beyond the single boot. No cameras. Or additional equipment. As summer turned to fall, the massive search operation gradually scaled back. The families of the missing hikers hired private investigators and organized volunteer searches. Offered their services, but the Rocky Mountains kept their secret. By the first snowfall, the case of the 5 missing hikers had become one of Colorado's most baffling mysteries. Asterisk for the families of the vanished hikers. The years that followed were a purgatory of unanswered questions. The official investigation remained open, but inactive. Anniversary memorial hikes became tradition, with relatives and friends making the journey to Aspen Meadow each June, leaving flowers at the last place where the presence of their loved ones had been confirmed. Melissa Chen's parents died in a car accident in 1989, never knowing what happened to their only daughter. The Lawson brothers' mother, Elizabeth, became an advocate for improved search and rescue protocols in wilderness areas, testifying before state legislators. Sarah Mitchell's photographs were exhibited in a Denver gallery with proceeds funding mountain rescue teams. James Harrison's father, retired Detective William Harrison, never stopped investigating. He interviewed everyone who had been on the mountain that week, studied weather patterns, consulted with wilderness experts, and followed up on every reported sighting or theory. His home office became a shrine to the case, walls covered with maps, timelines, and photographs. They didn't just vanish into thin air, he insisted to anyone who would listen. People leave traces. We just haven't found them yet. By 2002, the 20th anniversary of the disappearance approached. The case had faded from public consciousness, referenced occasionally in articles about unsolved mysteries or the dangers of wilderness recreation. The annual memorial hikes had dwindled to just immediate family members. Elizabeth Lawson had reluctantly begun the process of having her sons legally declared dead, a step she had resisted for 2 decades. Without bodies or definitive evidence, accepting their loss felt like betrayal. But practical matters insurance policies, a small inheritance from her late husband, finally forced her hand. William Harrison, now in his 70s and in failing health, had moved into an assisted living facility. His case files, accumulated over 20 years of private investigation, filled dozens of boxes that his neighbors helped him pack away into storage. The mystery of the 5 hikers seemed destined to remain unsolved.
Wow.
The truth buried somewhere, in the vast wilderness of the Rocky Mountains, until a chance discovery at a Saturday morning yard sale in a Denver suburb changed everything. Diane Foster, a 35-year-old librarian with a casual interest in photography, was browsing through the collection of used books and household items spread across a suburban lawn. Among the well-worn paperbacks and chipped coffee mugs, a leather-bound photo album caught her eye. The price tag read $2. It's just been sitting in our attic, the elderly woman running the sale told her. My husband and I bought this house 5 years ago from the estate of the previous owner. There were a few boxes left behind that we never got around to dealing with. Diane paid for the album and several books, tucking her purchases into her tote bag. It wasn't until that evening, curled up on her sofa, that she opened the album and found herself staring into the smiling faces of 5 young hikers she recognized immediately from news reports that had haunted her childhood. Asterisk, 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 Diane Foster's hands trembled as she turned the pages of the leather-bound album. The first photographs were familiar, the same group shot outside the ranger station that had appeared in newspapers and on missing persons posters for years. But the subsequent pages contained images she had never seen before. The 5 hikers, setting up camp at Aspen Meadow, filtering water from a crystal-clear stream, pointing out distant peaks as the sun set behind them. Sarah Mitchell's skill as a photographer was evident in every carefully composed shot. She had captured not just their journey, but the essence of their friendship. James, helping Melissa across a rocky stream. The Lawson brothers laughing over a map, the group toasting with metal cups around a small campfire. The photos continued, chronologically documenting the first day's hike and their night at Aspen Meadow. Then came images from the second day's journey toward Timber Lake. The group looked relaxed and happy, making good progress along the trail. The timestamps in the album's margins, written in neat handwriting, indicated the photos had been taken over the course of their planned 3-day expedition, but it was the later photographs that caused Diane's breath to catch. According to the timestamps, these images were taken after the point when the hikers should have disappeared. They showed the group veering off the main trail, following what appeared to be a narrow deer path through increasingly dense forest. Their expressions had changed, more serious, occasionally glancing over their shoulders. Asterisk, asterisk, in one particularly striking image. James stood at the edge of a small clearing, pointing at something just out of frame, his face a mixture of confusion and concern. The next photo showed a structure barely visible through the trees, something that didn't belong in the wilderness. It appeared to be a small cabin or shelter, weathered and partially concealed by vegetation. The final pages of the album contained the most disturbing images. The group approached the cabin cautiously, Close-up shots revealed strange symbols, carved into the wooden door, geometric patterns that Diane didn't recognize. The last photograph showed the open doorway, pitch black inside, with James half-stepping over the threshold, his hand reaching out toward the darkness. Asterisk, asterisk. After that, nothing. The remaining pages of the album were empty. Tucked inside the back cover was a handwritten note on yellowed paper. If found, please deliver to authorities. What we discovered in these mountains wasn't meant to be found. We're being followed now. I don't think we'll make it back. Sarah Mitchell, June 19, 1982. Diane closed the album, her mind racing. This was evidence in a 20-year-old missing persons case, potentially the key to solving a mystery that had haunted Colorado for 2 decades. She reached for her phone and dialed the non-emergency police number. I need to report evidence related to the Harrison hiking group disappearance from 1982, she told the operator, her voice steadier than she expected. I've found Sarah Mitchell's photo album, and it shows what happened to them. Within an hour, 2 detectives from the cold case unit arrived at Diane's apartment. Detective Marcus Rivera, a veteran investigator nearing retirement, Detective Amelia Cho, examined the album carefully, wearing gloves to preserve any potential fingerprints or DNA. Where exactly did you get this? Rivera asked, his expression grave as he studied the final photographs. Diane explained about the yard sale, providing the address and describing the elderly woman who had sold her the album. She said they found boxes in the attic when they bought the house from the previous owner's estate. We'll need to take this into evidence, Detective Cho said, carefully placing the album in an evidence bag, and we'll need a full statement from you. As Diane provided her formal statement, Detective Rivera made a call that would reactivate one of Colorado's most notorious cold cases. By morning, the investigation into the disappearance of the 5 hikers had roared back to life after 20 years of dormancy. Asterisk. The Pine Ridge Police Department's conference room buzzed with activity as Detective Rivera pinned enlarged copies of Sarah Mitchell's photographs to the evidence board. Representatives from the county sheriff's office, park rangers, and the FBI gathered around the table, examining the images that had remained hidden for 2 decades. William Harrison, 78, and using a wheelchair, sat at one end of the table. When detectives had called to inform him of the discovery, he had insisted on being involved. Despite his frail health, his mind remained sharp, especially regarding the details of his son's disappearance. I always knew they'd find something, he said, his voice cracking with emotion as he studied the photographs. James wouldn't have led them astray without good reason. Detective Cho had spent the night researching the property where the album had been found. The house belonged to a Gerald Mackenzie who died in 1997, she reported. He lived alone, worked as a park maintenance worker until his retirement in 1985, kept to himself according to neighbors. Any connection to our hikers? Rivera asked. None that's immediately apparent, Cho replied. But here's where it gets interesting. Mackenzie started working for the Park Service in late 1982, just a few months after the disappearance. He specifically requested assignment to the Eagle Peak region. William Harrison leaned forward. He was covering his tracks, keeping an eye on the area. The FBI analyst, Special Agent Diana Wells, focused on the symbols carved into the cabin door. These are consistent with certain occult practices, she explained. Similar symbols have been found at sites associated with a fringe group active in the Colorado mountains during the late 1970s and early 80s. They called themselves the Guardians of the Eternal Path. A cult, Rivera asked. More like an extreme wilderness preservation group with mystical beliefs, Wells clarified. They believed certain mountain locations were sacred portals or energy centers that needed protection from human interference. They were known to harass hikers and campers, though no violent incidents were ever officially linked to them. Park Ranger Martin Thompson, who had worked in the region for over 30 years, studied the photos of the cabin. I know these mountains better than my own backyard, and I've never seen this structure. It's not on any official maps or registers. Could you locate it based on these images? Cho asked. Thompson considered the surrounding landscape visible in the photographs. Possibly. The rock formation in the background is distinctive. It could be in the Eastern Ridge area, where we found some of their belongings back in '82. William Harrison's hand shook as he held one of the photographs. Sarah knew they were in danger, he said quietly. That's why she left this record. She hid the album somewhere. This Mackenzie fellow found it. The investigation moved quickly. Within hours, researchers had compiled files on Gerald Mackenzie, discovering that he had been briefly questioned during the original investigation as one of several park employees interviewed about the missing hikers. Nothing had flagged him as suspicious at the time. A search of county records revealed that Mackenzie purchased his house with cash in late 1982, despite his modest salary. His bank records showed no unusual activity before that time. That would explain the sudden availability of funds. We need to find that cabin, Rivera decided. If it's still standing after all these years, it might contain evidence. If not, the site itself could yield remains or personal effects. 2 days later, an expedition team assembled at the Pinewood Ranger Station, the same starting point the 5 hikers had used 20 years earlier. The team included Detectives Rivera and Cho, Ranger Thompson, 2 forensic specialists, and a search and rescue unit familiar with the difficult terrain. William Harrison had provided his son's original maps, with his own notes from years of investigation, added in different colors of ink. Combined with Sarah's photographs and modern GPS technology, they hoped to locate the mysterious cabin that had been the last known location of the missing hikers. Asterisk, as the team prepared to depart. A rental car pulled into the parking lot. A woman in her 60s emerged, her face instantly recognizable to William Harrison despite the passage of 2 decades. "Elizabeth," he said as she approached. "You came?" Elizabeth Lawson, mother of Tom and Rick, nodded grimly. "Wild horses couldn't have kept me away, Bill. Not when we might finally learn what happened to our children." The 2 aging parents embraced, united by grief and the sudden unexpected renewal of hope that had sustained them through 20 years of uncertainty. Asterisk. The eastern ridge of the Eagle Peak Wilderness was even more formidable than the expedition team had anticipated. Decades of weather erosion had altered the landscape, making it difficult to match the terrain to Sarah's photographs. What had been a narrow deer path in 1982 had long since been reclaimed by the forest. "The rock formation should be just ahead," Ranger Thompson said, consulting both the photographs and his GPS unit. The team had been hiking for 6 hours, covering ground that would have taken less time in the past, before landslides had created new obstacles in the years since the original disappearance. Detective Otto Rivera helped William Harrison navigate the difficult terrain. Despite objections from everyone, including Elizabeth, the elderly man had insisted on joining the expedition. "I've been looking for my son for 20 years, he had said firmly. "I'm going to be there when they find him." A compromise had been reached. William would accompany them to the base camp and remain there with a safety officer while the main team pushed on to search for the cabin. Elizabeth, recognizing her physical limitations, had reluctantly agreed to stay behind as well. As the team crested a steep incline, Ranger Thompson suddenly raised his hand, signaling a halt. "There," he said, pointing to a distinctive rock outcropping that resembled a bird's head in profile. "That's the formation from the background of the photos." Detective Cho compared the current view with the enlarged photographs they carried. "The cabin should be approximately 400 yards in that direction," she said, indicating a densely wooded area to their right. The team proceeded cautiously, spreading out to cover more ground while maintaining visual contact with each other. The forest was unnaturally quiet, no birdsong, no rustling of small animals in the underbrush. Even the constant mountain breeze seemed to die away as they ventured deeper into the trees.
"Over here?"
called one of the forensic specialists after 20 minutes of searching. The team converged on his position to find not a cabin, but a rectangular depression in the earth, approximately the size a small structure would have occupied. Around the perimeter, rotted wood and rusted metal suggested the remains of a building that had collapsed or been deliberately destroyed years ago. Asterisk. Detective Cho donned latex gloves and carefully examined a piece of wood that still bore traces of carved symbols similar to those in Sarah's photographs. "This is it," she confirmed, "or what's left of it." Asterisk. The forensic team began a methodical search of the site. setting up a grid pattern and documenting every potential piece of evidence. They didn't have to dig far to make their first significant discovery: a Nikon camera, its once black casing now faded and partially disintegrated from years of exposure. Sarah's camera, Rivera said softly. The film might still be intact. As the search expanded outward from the cabin site, more discoveries followed. A hiking boot matching the one found 20 years earlier, fragments of a backpack, a watch, with the initials are Elric Lawson. But it was what they found beneath the collapsed remains of the cabin floor that transformed their understanding of the case. A hidden trapdoor led to a small cellar or root cellar, its contents remarkably preserved due to the dry, sealed environment. Inside were stacks of journals and maps far older than those carried by the 5 hikers. The journals, dating back to the 1930s, contained detailed accounts of energy convergences and portal activities in the mountains. Elaborate symbols matching those on the cabin door filled the margins. More disturbing were the photographs. Pinned to the earthen walls, dozens of images of hikers and campers taken from a distance without their knowledge. Some of the photos dated back decades, while others were more recent. Among them were surveillance photos of James Harrison and his friends, taken days before their documented hike. They were being watched, Detective Cho said, examining the photos with her flashlight. Targeted. The most damning evidence lay in a metal box tucked into a corner of the cellar. Inside were personal items belonging to the 5 hikers' wallets. Identification cards, Melissa's botanical research notes, James's geology specimens, and at the bottom of the box is a stack of Polaroid photographs that turned Detective Rivera's stomach. The images showed the 5 hikers bound and apparently unconscious inside the cabin. Hooded figures surrounded them, faces hidden but postures, suggesting some kind of ritual or ceremony. The final Polaroid showed the group being led from the cabin at night, down a path into the darkness of the forest. "This is a crime scene," Rivera said, his voice tight. "Not a disappearance or an accident. These people were abducted." As the forensic team documented the cellar's contents, one of the search and rescue members called from outside, "Detectives, you need to see this." 50 yards from the cabin site, partially concealed by decades of forest growth, they discovered what appeared to be a large fire pit. The ash and soil samples would need laboratory analysis, but the initial examination by the forensic specialists confirmed what they all feared: bone fragments. Likely human, mixed with the ash dot by nightfall, the expedition had transformed into a major evidence recovery operation. Additional personnel and equipment were brought in, with powerful lights set up to allow work to continue through the night. William Harrison and Elizabeth Lawson waited at the base camp, receiving updates, but spared the details of the most disturbing discoveries. The investigation now had answers, but they were darker than anyone had anticipated. The 5 hikers had been targeted, stalked, and ultimately abducted by what appeared to be members of the Guardians of the Eternal Path. The evidence suggested they had been killed in some kind of ritual, their remains cremated in the fire pit. But 2 critical questions remained unanswered. Why had Gerald Mackenzie, the park worker who had presumably been involved with the group, kept the photo album instead of destroying it with other evidence? And why had the cult targeted these specific hikers among the hundreds who traversed the popular trails each season? As Detective Cho examined the centuries-old journals found in the cellar, a pattern began to emerge, one that suggested the 5 friends might have been chosen because of who they were and what they knew, rather than simply being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Asterisk, a week after the discovery of the cabin site, the investigation headquarters had moved to the Pine Ridge Police Department. Evidence boards lined the walls, displaying timeline charts, photographs, and connections between the hikers and the cult. Forensic analysis had confirmed the worst. The bone fragments belonged to at least 5 individuals, consistent with the ages and physical characteristics of the missing hikers. Detective
Ow.
Cho had immersed herself in the journals recovered from the cellar. As she presented her findings to the team, William Harrison and Elizabeth Lawson sat quietly in the corner, determined to hear the truth, however painful. The guardians of the Eternal Path believed certain mountain locations contained energy portals, Cho explained. Their entire ideology centered around protecting these sites from what they called scientific corruption. Anyone who studied or documented these locations was considered a threat. She pointed to Melissa Chen's research notes, recovered from the metal box. Melissa wasn't just studying alpine plants. Her doctoral work focused specifically on unusual growth patterns around certain geological formations the cult considered sacred. Rivera nodded, connecting the dots. And James was a geology professor who had published a paper 6 months before the hike about unusual mineral compositions in the Eastern Ridge area, Cho confirmed. The exact area where the cabin was located. William Harrison leaned forward. James mentioned unusual readings in that region. Thought there might be undiscovered mineral deposits. The cult saw your son and Melissa as threats, Cho said gently. Their research was getting too close to the locations the cult wanted to keep secret. What about the others? Elizabeth asked, her voice barely audible. My boys, Sarah, ... They were guilty by association, Rivera explained. The journals described the need to remove all witnesses. Sarah's photography made her an additional threat visual. Documentation of sites they wanted to keep hidden, the investigation had identified. 6 surviving members of the Guardians, now elderly men and women, living quiet lives across several states. 3 had been arrested, including a former park ranger who had worked alongside Gerald Mackenzie. Under interrogation, the former cult members confirmed what the evidence suggested. The 5 hikers had been ambushed near Timber Lake when they strayed too close to what the cult considered a primary energy nexus. They were taken to the cabin, drugged, and subjected to a ritual meant to cleanse the sacred ground of scientific contamination. What about Mackenzie? William asked.
Oh.
Why did he keep the album?
Oh.
Detective Rivera opened a file containing the results of the search of Mackenzie's personal effects and storage. We found this in a lockbox, he said, sliding across a yellowed. Enveloped inside was a handwritten confession, dated a week before Mackenzie's death in 1997. In it, he described his role in the abduction and killings, his subsequent guilt, and his inability to destroy Sarah's album, the only evidence that might someday bring closure to the families. I cannot die with this secret, he had written. I was wrong. We were all wrong. What we did to those young people cannot be justified by any belief system. I leave this record in the photographer's album as my confession. Yet he had died without revealing the album's location, his courage failing him at the end. As the meeting concluded, Elizabeth Lawson approached the evidence board, gently touching the photographs of her sons. At least now we know, she said. Softly, all these years I imagined them lost, afraid, suffering. There's some mercy in knowing it was quick. William Harrison nodded, though his expression suggested less acceptance. We know who. We know why. We know how, he said. But it doesn't bring them back. No, Detective Cho agreed. But it does bring them justice. Asterisk, 3 months later, a memorial service was held at Aspen Meadow, the last place where the 5 hikers had camped safely before their fateful encounter with the cult. The families had decided to scatter the recovered remains there, returning them to the mountains they had loved. The case had made national headlines. 3 additional cult members had been arrested, facing charges of kidnapping, murder, and conspiracy. The statute of limitations had not expired for these crimes. Despite the passage of 20 years, Diane Foster stood at the edge of the gathering, still processing her role in solving the long cold case. Detective Cho had invited her to the service, feeling she deserved to witness the closure she had helped provide. I still can't believe a $2 purchase at a yard sale solved a 20-year mystery, Diane said as the detective joined her. Sarah. Mitchell made sure her story would be told, Cho replied. She documented everything up to the last moment, then hid the album where it would eventually be found. The ceremony was simple, but profound. William Harrison, now using a portable oxygen tank, but determined to make the journey to the meadow, spoke about his son's love for the mountains and his dedication to understanding the natural world. James and his friends died because they sought truth, he said, his voice carrying across the meadow. They wanted to understand this place, to document its wonders, to share its beauty. There is no greater purpose in life, and no more honorable. A reason to be remembered. Elizabeth Lawson spoke of her son's brotherhood and adventure-seeking spirit. Representatives from Melissa's and Sarah's families shared memories and read passages from their writings and journals as the ashes were scattered. Park ranger announced that a memorial plaque would be placed at the trailhead, honoring the five hikers and warning future generations to remain vigilant, even in the most beautiful wilderness. After the ceremony, William approached Diane. "Well, I wanted to thank you personally," he said, extending a frail hand. "I spent 20 years searching, and you found the answer? With a random purchase at a yard sale?" "I just got lucky," Diane replied. "Sarah did the hard part, making sure there was evidence to find." William nodded. Sarah knew they wouldn't survive, but she made sure they wouldn't be forgotten, that their story would be told. Later that evening, as the families and investigators shared a meal in Pine Ridge, Detective Cho received a call from the forensic lab. The technicians had managed to develop several images from Sarah's camera found at the cabin site. Most were damaged beyond recognition, but one final photograph remained intact, taken inside the cabin just before their capture. The image showed James examining the symbols on the interior walls, Melissa taking notes, and the Lawson brothers looking at an old map they'd found. Sarah had captured their final moments of freedom, still curious, still documenting, still unaware of the fate that awaited them. But it was the background of the photograph that caused Detective Cho to call for immediate forensic enhancement. Barely visible in the shadows of the cabin's corner was a figure watching the hikers, not wearing the hood described in the Polaroids, but clearly observing them with calculated interest. When the enhanced image arrived by email an hour later, Cho immediately recognized the face from the case files. Gerald Mackenzie, younger but unmistakable. And around his neck hung a pendant with the same symbol carved into the cabin door. The man who had kept Sarah's album, who had written a deathbed confession but failed to reveal it, had been more than just a participant in the crimes. The positioning, the pendant, the authority in his stancel suggested he had been a leader. Perhaps the leader of the Guardians of the Eternal Path. His reluctance to destroy the album had not been genuine remorse, but something more complex. Trophy kept from a victory over those who threatened his sacred sites, yet also insurance against other cult members who might someday turn against him. Detective Cho decided to wait until morning to share this final revelation with the families. Tonight was for remembrance and closure. Tomorrow would be soon enough to confirm that justice, while delayed by 20 years, would finally be complete for the five hikers who had ventured into the mountains in search of beauty and knowledge, only to encounter humanity's darkest impulses. As the gathering broke up, William Harrison stood on the restaurant's porch, gazing up at the silhouette of Eagle peek against the night sky. "They're home now," he said quietly to Detective Cho. "After all these years, they're finally home." The mountains stood silent against the starry backdrop. Its secrets revealed at last, not by mystical energies or sacred portals, but by a young photographer's determination to leave a record of truth, preserved in an album that had waited patiently for 20 years to tell its story. The truth stayed buried for 20 years, until a $2 yard sale find exposed everything. If this story hit you, tap like. It helps others find these forgotten cases. What would you have done if you found that album? Could more cults still be hiding in the wilderness? Share your thoughts. I read every comment.